Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing Injustice 2 on the GeForce GTX 1050 Ti. For FPS monitoring, I'll be using CAM. If you want to download the software, there's a link down in the description. And if you enjoy the content and want to support the channel directly, there are Humble and Amazon affiliate links down in the description as well. So Injustice 2, I'll be doing 1080p, 900p, 720p and 1440p. To skip any of those sections of the video, check the description below. So first I'll show you 1080p, trying to get 60 frames per second without any drops whatsoever. And to do so, I just lowered a couple settings. I lowered lighting from high to medium and particles from very high to high. And that was enough to be pretty much at 60 frames per second all the time. Remember that this game is capped at 60 frames per second and you cannot go any higher than 60 since the entire game's code is linked to the frame rate. That's how fighting games work. But on cinematics and special attacks and all that kind of stuff where you don't have control on the game, it's capped at 30 frames per second, so keep that in mind, just like previous fighting games from this developer. So yeah, for 1080p, just lowering those two settings was enough for 60 frames per second. Then I show you 1080p max settings to show you that it drops below 60 frames per second. It's not unplayable, but it's less responsive, so I recommend you try it out yourself to see what fits you best. But I really don't see much of a difference visually, and the extra responsiveness on the controls is worth it, in my opinion. Then on 900p and 720p, I could max the game out without a problem. It was running at 60 frames per second all the time. But on 720p, I was able to crank up textures from high to very high without stuttering, like on the previous resolutions I tried. And finally at 1440p, I wasn't able to get 60 frames per second. I had to use the lowest settings, except in textures, and well, I was just below 60 frames per second pretty much all the time, and also below 50 frames per second. I was hitting the 40-ish FPS mark, and you'll see that the game is pretty much running in slow motion, so I recommend over 50 frames per second for this game. I'll talk more about that in a second. I didn't test a better CPU since the CPU usage is very low. As you can see, it will be pretty much below 60% most of the time, and the GPU is being utilized well, so if you have a better CPU, you won't see a difference with this gameplay, so keep that in mind. So in the options menu, there are more settings than I was expecting, so it's a good surprise. The game would recommend you to use high textures if you have 4GB of VRAM, and if you use very high, it recommends to have a 6GB of VRAM video card. For what I could see, if I use very high on a 4GB card, it stutters on some levels, on some others it doesn't, so I recommend you try it out. Maybe very high works fine for you. 720p seems to be fine with very high settings, even with 4GB of VRAM. Then for 2GB of VRAM, I recommend using medium, and that should be fine. Then the thing that gave me the biggest performance boost without changing the quality that much was lighting. If you use medium instead of high, for example on the 1050 Ti, if I had everything maxed out, I had like 53, 55 FPS on the most demanding places. But after I lowered lighting from high to medium, I got 60 FPS pretty much all the time. So I recommend you check it out. Then the other options that will help you out to get better performance are shadow quality, shadow technique in some instances, screen space reflections, ambient occlusion and particles density. Those options were the ones that gave me the biggest boost in performance. Particles mode didn't help me that much at all. It ran pretty much the same for me. And we also have a dynamic resolution option, which I recommend you try it out. I didn't get any boost in performance by using dynamic resolution, so I'm not sure if it's working or not. And you'll see a lot of screen tearing in my videos. That's because I'm not using VSync, but the game is capped at 60 frames per second. So if you want to avoid screen tearing, just enable VSync and you'll be fine. And well, this game, since it's a fighting game, if you're below 50 frames per second, the game will be running pretty much in slow motion. Below 50 it already feels like slow motion, so I recommend you avoid that and stay at 60 frames per second constant, or at the very least over 50 frames per second. But yeah, not much else to mention. One of the worst places for me, at least in performance, was the swamp map. So just in the swamp area I got like the worst performance. Then we have the Gorilla City, which was also a big hit, but it wasn't as big as on the swamp. So I recommend you try out the game in that level to see if the performance is good or not. And the game also has an auto detect option to tweak the game for you. So for example, you have a 1050 Ti and you want 60 FPS on 1080p, you just select 1080p, then select the auto detect option, and the game will run the benchmark many times, trying different settings until it finds the best settings. It works pretty well actually. I was quite surprised that it lowered the settings very similar to what I did in the past to get 60 frames per second. It sometimes lowers some extra settings that are not necessary to get 60 frames per second all the time, but it's very close to what the best settings will be, so I recommend you try it out first. But yeah guys, that's pretty much it. I hope you keep enjoying the video. Thanks for watching and see you next time.
You're just a man in a suit.
Superman wins.
Chances, Bruce. You will lose.
I'm ending this nightmare.
That's not what I had planned.
Superman wins.
You gave me the kryptonite.
I never thought you'd use.
Begin.
I'm done holding back.
Don't waste my time.
Superman wins. Begin.
I will pulverize you. I can end this anytime I want.
There's no peace in revenge.
Stay down.
Superman wins.
We were friends once.
Begin.
Hope you've learned something.
Superman wins. Begin.
No more Mr. Boy Scout.
Good move.
Stay down.
Superman wins.